Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together, and then we will get right to it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So we are talking about Danny Gordis's chapter entitled A Conversation, Not an Ideology, in which he talks about the leading Zionist writers and thinkers and theoreticians at the turn of the 20th century, late 1800s, early 1900s, around the time of Kishinev massacre, which was 1903, and which proved to be incredibly bloody and horrible and fatal, and both the violence and malevolence and the deadliness of it and the indifference of Europe to it, the sense in which it was broadly shared by the non-Jews among whom they lived. It was such an eerie precursor to the Shoah. And among the things that the Kishinev pogrom did in 1903 was prompt this whole conversation of different responses. What would be best for the Jewish future? What would be best for the Jewish state? And as you know, if you read the chapter, Danny provides a discussion of a lot of these different thinkers. So I want to ask you kind of three framing questions, and then we can get into the particulars. Here's the first question. What did you learn from reading chapter 3 that you did not already know? What did you learn from reading chapter 3 that you did not already know? Second, in what way does this conversation relate to today's world in Israel? Right, we met last Tuesday, the day of the Israeli election, and now we meet a week later, 1 week after the Israeli election. Of course, it is also our own election, and we know how the elections seem to have shaken out in Israel. What kind of connection can you draw between the conversation they had in the year 1903 and following to the conversation Israeli Jews are having in 2022? And the third question is, how would you describe the nature of this conversation among people who disagree passionately? And how does it compare on election day in America to our own conversation among American leaders and thinkers and politicians who disagree passionately? Okay, so those are our three questions. What did you learn that you did not already know? What is the relevance of this 125-year-old conversation to today in Israel? And how does it compare to the American conversation? So anyone want, let's take the first one. What like when you step back from chapter 3, and one of the things I love about it is it's just so lucid, it's so simple, it's so clear. He talks about a lot of thinkers that I've always heard about, Jabotinsky, et cetera, but in just a few pages, he summarizes like a rainbow. You see all the different colors and stripes in such a clear way. What did you think of it, and what did you learn from it? Anyone want to share? Paul Kalis. Paul, you are now. You have a very important role, Paul. You have succeeded our beloved and departed David Kopelman. May he rest in peace. David was always so helpful. He always raised his hand to offer up comments and to get the conversation going. And so, Paul, thank you for doing that now.
We were very close.
Yeah. So what did you learn? What did you learn, Paul?
Well, one of the things I learned was the concept of the new Jew. I really didn't know about that.
I don't want to hear about it.
So, excuse me?
No, I don't know. That was some ambient noise. If everyone else can be muted. Yeah, keep going.
The idea that the Jews couldn't maintain their current status either physically or intellectually. That they had, basically, to use a baseball idiom, they had to step up to the plate to protect themselves and to create a new homeland where they would be safe.
Right,
Okay.
and and that new Jew is a leitmotif really through all the different thinkers, right? So,
Yes,
you know, you have Max Nordau, who Danny doesn't talk about that much, but he talks about the muscular Jew. And and Jabotinsky, who, you know, very accurately foretells that it's gonna be war. It's literally gonna be war if they're gonna do this thing, and they have to be able to become a fighting Jew. And Jabotinsky, you know, founds Beitar to teach yeshiva bachers how to become warriors. And even a poet like, you know, I thought that the piece that made this point so vividly was Chaim Nachman Bialik. Actually, I'll just, Rhiannon, first of all, let me thank my friend and colleague Rhiannon for hosting this. Rhiannon, could you please screen share for a second on page 50? Page 50 of the handout. I want to just read this. This is apropos of the new Jew, and how it's you know, from Jabotinsky's "We got to be fighters" to Breslau's, Nordau's "We've got to be muscular Jews," etc. But here's Bialik. Bialik actually goes to Kishinev after the massacre, okay, and he kind of blames the victim, and he was probably right. On page 50, then Bialik turns his rage on the Jewish tradition itself. Bialik describes how after the attack, these men of priestly descent stepped over the broken bodies of their still living wives and ran to the rabbi to ask, "Is my wife still permitted to me?" That is what worries you, Bialik virtually screams. The people you love are broken, wounded, raped, lying on the ground. And all that concerns you is a question of Jewish law, the matter of whether your wives are still sexually permitted to you. What has happened to your humanity? What have you become? It makes no difference, of course, whether the scene as Bialik describes it ever took place. He was, after all, a poet and not a historian. What matters was his horror both at what Europe was capable of doing, and because of the passivity that Jewish tradition had fostered in them, what the Jews could not do. And then the exile of the Jew from his own land, Bialik claims, has more than robbed the Jew of his strength and his courage. It has eroded his capacity to feel. Exile has destroyed him. Thank you, Rhiannon. We can come back to the full screen. So there is a, you know, there is a through line from most of these thinkers that exile has made Jews wimpy, dysfunctional yeshiva bachers. All we can do is argue about ancient texts. We can't fight. We can't defend ourselves. We're not full men. We're not full human beings. And, you know, and it's about physicality. It's about strength. It's about exercise. And the iteration depends on the thinker. So for Aleph Dalet Gorbatin, it's about working the land and getting Israeli soil on your hands. For Jabotinsky, it's about fighting. For Nordau, it's about developing our physique. But you see the need for a new Jew. And that is a through line. Paul, you were saying that you were not quite as familiar with that whole trope. Is that right?
yes.
So let me give you a bonus for no extra charge.
Okay.
Guess what the name of Itamar Ben Gavir's party is? Otzma Yehudit, Jewish power.
Oh,
So it plays on this whole trope of we're done getting kicked around. We're done getting kicked around. There's a new sheriff in town, and if anyone's going to be doing any kicking around, it's us. We're going to defend ourselves. So you can kind of draw a straight line from this focus on defenselessness and vulnerability. We got to get strong to Ben Gavir's approach, which is Otzma Yehudit, Jewish power. And so you can see kind of the roots of it. What else? Anyone else want to offer what you did not know before? Debbie Ginsburg.
Yeah. Good morning. At the outset, you asked how the reading relates to current day, this day, election day.
Yes.
So the absurdity, the self-centeredness, here these pious men are thinking about, can they have sex with their wives after they've been raped? And I can't help but think about Herschel Walker, who claims he is pro-life, anti-abortion. Yet when all of these revelations come out about women who he coaxed into having abortions, and they had proof of it as well. I mean, it's really absurd. You can't help but laugh.
Or cry, as the case may be.
Yeah.
So Debbie, let me pivot from your comment to a question that just begs to be asked, which is, how would you compare the nature of this conversation among Zionists at the turn of the century, around the time of the Kishinev massacre? How would you compare their disagreement to the disagreements of our own body politic today? How would you compare them? Anyone want to take a stab?
The reading had a lot of various viewpoints with different outcomes, requests for the establishment of a Jewish state, whereas today it only seems to be a few views. The left, well, a few, the right, the extreme right, the left, and the extreme left. But right now, voting, it's Democrat versus Republican, with a big question mark for the independents.
Okay. Any otherybody want to take a stab at, if you were to compare and contrast the debate among Zionist thinkers at the turn of the century to the debate among America's political leaders today, what differences do you see? I mean, there's obviously deeply held differences of opinion, but what other differences do you see? Paul Kalis?
I think it's worse today. I think that in the 1900s, it was a matter of philosophy and way of living. Today, it's outright lying in the face of facts that you can observe.
Right.
So human beings haven't learned much.
Yeah. So what struck me about it is that our debates today are degraded in two ways. One, what you say, Paul, which is facts don't matter. And to Debbie's point, that is, people who claim that they are pro-life people and won't do abortion or don't condone abortion and they're glad Roe got reversed, etc. They will vote for Herschel Walker despite knowing, because facts just don't matter. Your jersey color matters more than your facts. And the other thing, so the very notion of truth and fact has been degraded in such a way that you can't really have a reasonable conversation on the merits, because there are no merits. There's only jersey colors. The other thing that I noticed here was that there's so much ad hominem vitriol in our debates, which is, it's not that I disagree with you on the merits. It is that you are the devil. You are a bad person. You are unpatriotic. I don't like you personally. I loathe you personally. In fact, January 6th stands for the proposition, I'd like you dead. I'd like you dead. And January 6th stands for the proposition that violence in the service of killing the enemy is a good thing. That's just patriotism. And some number of millions of Americans believe that. So you just have an ad hominem, vitriol, personal, not fact-based, jersey-based approach. And for all their differences on the merits, now, of course, I wasn't there. I don't know any of these people. I only know what Danny Gordis writes about them. But it doesn't feel like the Zionist thinkers hated each other in the same way that America's political leaders hate each other. So that is a very different difference as well. Anyone want to tackle the question? Wendy Landon, please.
One of the things that I think is similar, though, when I think back to Herzl and the forming of Zionism, is there was a feeling among some of them of an existential threat. And I think here in the US, something that's similar is in some parts of our country, and there's a feeling of existential threat
Mhm.
against our way of life and our peoplehood as Americans. And I think that's similar.
Yeah. And then, of course, the question is, what do you do if you feel that? And what Herzl did, of course, was he proposed at one of the subsequent Zionist Congresses the idea of Uganda, which I guess Danny said is not really Uganda, it was really Kenya. But let's have a homeland not in Israel. And you could understand if it's 1903 and you're hearing the stories, which, you know, he quotes, so I'm not going to, no need to read it and bring it into this public space, but he quotes it about the mauling and the viciousness and the killing, etc. That there was, you know, Herzl felt like we don't have the luxury of time. We need a sanctuary now. And therefore, let's go to Uganda, let's go to Kenya. And then, the counter response that that engendered. And again, you have an existential threat that results in a very different idea. We'll do Uganda, we won't do Palestine. Versus the way that existential threat today is worked through by the body politic, which in many cases, the threat of violence is implicit, if not explicit. Let's go. I want to, any other, let's just talk for one last second about the middle question that I offered you as a framer, which was, what does this chapter 3, A Conversation, Not an Ideology, what light does it shed on Israeli politics today? Anybody want to tackle that one? Esther Greif.
Yes, well, it's response to 1 and 2. One of the things I learned was a continuation, actually, on what you read before. The Jewish tradition, Bialik essentially says, is a cancer that has destroyed Jews' humanity. And so the conflict between secular and, Jews who don't want any part of tradition and those who do is playing out to me today with the right wing that has infiltrated the new government.
Right.
And the conflict between the role of traditional Judaism versus a secular Judaism, cultural.
Yeah. And in fact, every kind of Judaism that you have seen has its roots in chapter 3, A Conversation, Not an Ideology. For example, how many of you have ever been to an AIPAC policy conference? And as you're going into the building where there's the policy conference, there's the weirdest, they say political bedfellows make, political allies make strange bedfellows. As you're walking into an AIPAC policy conference, you see, Palestinians saying Palestine will be free, and marching right with them are Satmar Hasidim, right? So you have like the most Orthodox looking Jews and Palestinians, and they're both deny the right of Israel to exist, and they're marching or they're protesting side by side. And you can say to yourself, well, I guess I understand where the Palestinians come from, but why would Satmar Jews rally with Palestinians against the right of Israel to exist? And the roots of that are in this chapter, which is, it's hard for us to access, but at least there's a rationale, as not compelling as it is to us, which is, this is God's role. Our job is to be passive in the face of history and let God redeem us, and etc. So you see that play out today. And as well, Esther, the people who are complete rejectionists of religion, and I think, that does exist, although that has evolved a lot, and there's much more reinterpretation and adaptation of Jewish norms. But the people who are really very strict rejectionists, Israelis who are strict rejectionists of religion, of Judaism, the bicyclists on Yom Kippur, etc., the people who never go in, or even just the complete secular Jews. I mean, my nephew married a wonderful woman who is a secular Israeli. And they're not angry rejectionists. They're just completely secular. And the irony is more secular than secular Americans. Secular Americans will come to shul on Yom Kippur. Secular Israelis, some I'm sure do, but my niece and her family don't come to shul on Yom Kippur. That's right. And you see that from Aleph Dalet Gordon and from Berdichevsky, who says we just have to get Judaism is the problem. We have to transcend Judaism. So you just see, you see all kinds of connections from the debate in 1903 to the reality of 2022. Any other comments either about the nature of their debate or the connection of their debate to modern Israel? John, please.
All right. You also see a great variation on people's thoughts about the roles of the Palestinians, what was going to happen, how receptive they would be, how harmonious things would be, from Jabotinsky basically saying we're going to have to fight our way in, to Herzl's original idea that we can all live in great peace. There's certainly in Israel and here are different ideas about the interaction between the Israelis, especially the Israeli government and the new government, what it's going to be with the Palestinians.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, John. Right, you have he brings the people who he calls Brit Shalom, covenant of peace, and he points out that they're not numerous, but they were influential because of the kinds of names like Judah Magnus and Gershom Shalom and Martin Buber, like really heavy-hitting intellectuals who said our job is to figure out how to work peacefully with Arabs, versus Jabotinsky, who said that's a pipe dream. If you want this land, you're going to have to fight and die for it. And you see, both of those views obviously ramified through the present. The left, I think, much less than it used. I mean, there used to be a Peace Now movement. I don't think the Peace Now, as I understand it from Israelis like Micha, Peace Now really is dead after the two intifadas. But at least it definitely continued, it persisted until the modern time, or land for peace. We'll give land, they'll give us peace, that kind of thing. So, okay. This is all to say that these few pages, which are an intellectual history of different strands of Zionism, speak very much to modern Israel, and in a way speak very much to modern America. I mean, in terms of what it's not. We just don't seem capable of having this kind of a principled debate. Everything I've heard and read says that if the Republicans get the House and the Senate, their only job is to completely stymie the president. So the idea is we're not going to work with, it's just constant loggerheads. And that whole edge does not really seem like what you have in chapter 3. So,
Rabbi,
yes,
Rabbi, I'm going to turn you off and on again just quickly because you have gone funny, your voice. Hold on.
This happened last time. Let me get off and I will get back on.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, thank you so much, Renan. What I'd like to do is start with kind of a stunning fact, which I kind of knew, but I hadn't really held on to, which is that Herzl died so young. So he really was, very much a Moses figure, right? Moses gets the people to the brink of the promised land and can't cross. And Herzl really launches political Zionism and dies of heartbreak at the age of 44. Because he dies, after Kishinev, he was so distraught and felt it was so urgent. He offered up the Uganda proposal, and only to see that it completely divided the Zionist Congress hopelessly, with some people really saying yes and some people really saying no. And he died of a heart failure. So, Rhiannon, if you could turn to page 53, please. And I want to, so if you look at the second column, the third paragraph from the bottom, or fourth paragraph of the page, only 44 years old, he died of heart failure on July 3rd, 1904. And what's so striking about this is it was so grim for the Jews, and it was so grim for Herzl when he died. Like, you'd like to think that when you leave the world, or when your loved one leaves the world, that they can look and say, everything is okay. The kids are okay. My family is okay. What I care about is okay. The country is okay. When Herzl dies, it was the antithesis of okay. He had offered this idea which divided the movement. This was 1 year post Kishinev, so he really gets that that Europe is a graveyard and we're running out of time, and he can't get the Kenya thing going, and he doesn't know what to do, and then he has his own health problems. So he dies young from heart problems, and he dies, it has to be heartbroken, that he sees the dreams that he wants not coming to fruition. Obviously, they only come to fruition 40 years after he dies. But the funeral itself, I want to read this, and I want to ask you to think about, why is it that we don't have a Herzl today? Or do we have a Herzl today? So Vienna, said one writer, had never seen such a funeral. Stefan Zweig, a Jewish writer who attended Herzl's funeral, wrote, "It was a strange day that day in July, unforgettable to everyone who witnessed it. Suddenly, from every station, from every train, day and night, from every region, from every port, they arrived and came in their thousands. Jews from Western and Eastern Europe, Russian and Turkish Jews from every district and every remote hamlet. They flowed into the city, the shock of the bad news still on their faces, and the truth that had been obscured for so long by dissents and gossip was now revealed to us in all of its might, that this man who is now being laid to rest was the leader of a great movement. Suddenly, Vienna is learning that it was no ordinary writer or poet who died, but one of those people who shape ideas, the like of whom appear so rarely on the stages of history. A terrible pain has cut through the hearts of an entire nation, and for the first time I have come to realize how much courage and hope this singular man has instilled in the world by means of his vision. It had been hundreds of years since the Jewish people had had such a leader." So let me go back to the full screen. Thank you, Rhiannon. I find this so rich. First of all, that he dies of heartbreak, and he dies of a broken heart, and he dies young, and he dies where it seems like his life work is now in disarray, and yet he doesn't live to see the fruition. And when he dies so young, it turns out that he just catalyzed this outpouring of love. And it also feels like he didn't get that love until after he died. He didn't get that love until after he died. So what does all of that, so much to talk about, but first of all, how does it make you feel? What kind of associations does it evoke that Herzl died so young with his dreams in disrepair at the time of his early death? Any takers? John, please.
For people of the vintage of many of us, it reminds me of JFK being assassinated.
Mm,
The He was not having a good time, by the way, when he was assassinated. He had not been very successful. In fact, it was only LBJ who made a lot of his policies get through Congress. But he was killed prematurely. We all had ideas about what was going to happen, and they were smashed for people our generation. However, in many ways, he was martyred, which had allowed things to happen afterwards.
Mm,
I would guess that the premature, terrible death of Herzl also, to some extent, solidified part of the movement, the Zionist movement.
mm. Yeah, really interesting comparison to JFK and the effects of being martyred on your legacy. Other comments? Please, Esther.
Yeah, well, one of the lines you read, that he was one of those people who shape ideas, the like of which whom appear so rarely on the stages of history. And what feels to me missing now, it's no one with a vision. But as Gorda says, not Gorda, Stefan Zweig, is very rare. So the question for me is, do we recognize these people when they appear? I don't know. I mean, the outpouring at Herzl's funeral, I think, was a surprise. It sounded like people hadn't realized his impact was that extensive.
Yeah, and so Esther, let's just double click on that observation. If people didn't realize it at the time, like they had Herzl, but they didn't realize they had Herzl until Herzl was gone. And here Herzl is this, once in a generation or more type of leader. And the question is, do we have a Herzl in our midst, either in Israel today or in America today? Do we have a truly great leader and we just don't get it? Or do we just not have such a leader? That, the Herzls come around every once in a while and they're not around now. And that, I'd love your thoughts on that. Do we have a Herzl and we just don't know it? And then maybe when whoever it is dies, we'll say, oh my God, this person was amazing. And we didn't get it at the time, shame on us. Or do we not have such a leader now? This is the age of pedestrian leaders, flawed leaders. Paul.
I think that one of the biggest differences between now and then is television. People being on television is ubiquitous. Some of them are brilliant and some of them are tyrants. We get used to them. After a while, many of us say, I'm not watching anymore. They're just repeating the same things over and over again. And when an idea is presented immediately on television, we have the opposite point of view. So the effect of a great man is diluted by this constant presence.
Right. It's absence that makes the heart grow fonder.
Out of it.
And there's not enough absence. Let me just, before I get to you, Paul, let me ask you this question. Do you feel that in your lifetime, you have lived to see a truly great leader that's at the stature of a Herzl?
Well, I'm going to surprise you and say yes. And that leader was Harry Truman. Harry Truman made a lot of momentous decisions, some of which you might agree with and some of which you might disagree with. But he truly said the buck stops here. And he made very, very difficult decisions, most of which worked out.
And would you say, Paul, so Truman, what about on the Israel side? I mean, Bibi is the longest serving prime minister ever. Would you put him in that category?
Well, Bibi is absolutely brilliant. When he speaks, people listen. When people act on his advice, that I don't know, because I don't act on his advice because I'm an American, not an Israeli. But he has the ability to be a great leader if he can get people together.
And thank you, Paul. And Elise, could you just say more about Yitzhak Rabin? Because I was thinking, you know, Rabin would be the one that comes to my mind.
Well, he took a chance on shaking hands with Arafat. He thought that I mean, that was a visionary thing to do when so many people, including Rabin himself, was not confident about it. But he thought that this was a way for peace for the whole area. And then before he had a chance to do anything, he was murdered.
Yeah.
So, I never, whenever I think of him, I always see his face when he was shaking hands
Yes.
with Arafat.
And what do you remember about it, Elise?
That I mean, I felt like I could see him praying to God that this was the right thing to do, that he had taken this big chance, and that he was, I think he knew he was risking everything for the opportunity to try something that might work for everybody in the area.
Yeah.
It was, I think it was almost more heartbreaking seeing that than when I heard that he was murdered.
Yeah. Sue, your hand was up.
Well, I sort of agree with what Paul said in terms of the vision right now. I think this, because I've been hearing so much of this one world vision, which is sort of scary. It's not coming from a leader, it's coming from the world spinning so fast. And I think technology's taken over our visionary individualism. And it's sort of scaring me, and I always blame it on my age, but I think that technology is the young people's vision, and I don't know how to explain that in any better way, but you know, with AI and I mean, artificial intelligence, and I just see a vision of a world just spinning and spinning and spinning without.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't explain it any better, but I think the vision is artificial intelligence right now.
Yeah.
Somehow it's taken over and consumed our younger generation,
Okay, Sue.
or at least living in Seattle, it seems that way.
Thank you, Sue. I want to take the Herzl dying at 44 in a more personal turn. I mean, you could talk about it, what other Herzls are out there that we don't know about. But here's something I want to invite you to think about. What is, just as a human being, not just a leader, what is it that we want out of our own life? In the following way, it does not seem that Herzl was happy. It does not seem like, you know, he was enjoying some version of a happy retirement, you know, golfing or chilling out or learning how to paint canvases.
Rabbi,
Chapter. Yes.
Rabbi, can you log on and off again? I'm so sorry.
We got it. Sorry, guys. We'll fix this for next week. I am so sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay, again, I'm so sorry. We will get this fixed for next week. I'm so sorry. The question that I was asking, just to repeat if you didn't hear me, was I wanted to take the Herzl dying at 44 in a more personal turn. We've talked to date in the conversation about are there Herzls in our own time in America or in Israel, and we just don't know about it because we don't know about it until they're gone. And that's an important question. Here's another question. What does Herzl teach us about how we want to live and how we want to die? What does Herzl teach us about what is it that we are principally after? And of course, you could say, yes, the answer is both. The answer is and, but it feels like Herzl tees up the following question. Do you want to spend the rest of your years seeking meaning? Or do you want to spend the rest of your years seeking joy and happiness? And of course, the answer probably is yes, both. I want meaning and joy and happiness. But I do think that if you take Herzl's life journey seriously, it confronts us with a question and a choice, because it does not feel like he had a lot of joy and happiness. He didn't have a lot of light touch. And in fact, as he died, he cared so much about the Jewish story, and there was Kishinev, and cared so much about the Jewish story, and there was the Dreyfus affair, and he cared so much about the Jewish story, and they hated us in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe. And he cared so much about the Jewish story, and after the thrill of launching the Zionist Congress, it felt like the entire thing was breaking apart over the Uganda proposal, and then he dies. Not a lot of joy in that picture, but total meaning. Total meaning. And so my question to you guys is, what are you after? What are you going for? And what does Herzl's life story suggest to you about how you want to prioritize your goals in the chapters that we have left? And is it, and because there's very different choices. If you want to prioritize joy, there's a whole set of decisions one could make. If you want to prioritize meaning and impact, that leads to another flow chart of different decisions one could make. So what are your thoughts about that? Anybody? Esther Greif, please, thank you.
I won't speak anymore. I feel like saying too much, but I just, the sentence after we're told that he died said Herzl had known since his youth that he had heart problems, yet he had given the risk to his own life no consideration. He knowingly sacrificed himself in the pursuit of the dream he believed could save his people. So to me, that's an additional question. That is, does one say, I have these physical limitations, therefore I'm going to live a more moderate life? And maybe he would have lived longer, but not have had the impact. But I also feel that we're all different. Not everyone has a passion that gives their life such meaning that one can devote oneself to. I remember reading about people who have, the woman, I forgot her name, who was committed to nuclear disarmament. And ultimately, her life really fell apart because of it for so many reasons. So I just think we all can't follow the same path. It
Correct.
depends on
There's
who
no,
we are. Yeah.
yes, there's no one answer and there's no one right answer, but it does feel like it's a question that is universal. And it's a question that calls out to all of us. What is it that we want to prioritize? What are we going for? And whatever answer we come up with is the right answer for us. John Boris.
I apologize for also speaking a bit. I think it also depends on what stage of life you're in. I mean, he was a young man pursuing a cause. Certainly as a younger man, I pursued many causes. But at this time of my life, there are different abilities to pursue causes, which are much more limited, and also a different look on what's left of life. So it's a question that someone in their 60s may be asking themselves. It's a different question for those of us who are older.
Absolutely. John, your words evoke the wisdom of Kohelet. There's a time and a season for everything under the sun. And I know that people I have the greatest love and respect for talk about a season of life that they call the harvest season, where they've worked, they've reaped, and now, they've sowed and now they want to reap. And now they want to get, now their agenda is nachas from loved ones, or their agenda is peace of mind, right? And that's absolutely completely valid. I was offering this not as an answer, but as a question, really, for everyone to think about, in this stage of your life, what are you thinking about? And to me, when I read about Herzl and the impact he had in the context of the life at that moment, this just commended itself. This conversation. I want to turn to Jabotinsky for a second, because Jabotinsky feels so relevant to today. Rhiannon, could you please turn to page 60 and 61? And to be totally honest with you, I had heard these phrases, 60 to 61. Thank you so much. I had heard these, I had heard this phrase, but I didn't really know exactly what it was. So on page 60, the first full paragraph at the end. So Jabotinsky founded a splinter movement, revisionist Zionism. In theory, revisionist and mainstream Zionism were not all that different. Both believed in the establishment of Jewish settlements in Palestine, the right to a Jewish armed force, and free Jewish immigration to Palestine, all accomplished through diplomacy with the British. Both of them also endorsed Jewish settlement of the entire land of Israel. Where they differed was in the degree to which they might be willing to use force if needed to achieve their goals. Jabotinsky began by organizing Jewish self-defense units across the Russian Empire, placing a heavy emphasis on the youth. Several years later, in 1923, Jabotinsky established a revisionist youth movement, Beitar, named for the last standing fortress of the Bar Kokhba rebellion against the Romans in 135. Beitar was designed to teach military tactics and to physically train the youth of Europe. As Jabotinsky explained in his essay, The Idea of Beitar, the aim of the movement was very simple, though difficult: to create that type of Jew which the nation needs in order to better and quicker build the Jewish state. The greatest difficulty is encountered because, as a nation, the Jews today are neither normal nor healthy, and life in diaspora affects the intelligent upbringing of normal and healthy citizens. And then it goes on to say, just this last little bit, unlike Ahad Ha'am and Brit Shalom, Jabotinsky was no pacifist. If the Jews wanted Palestine, he warned, they were going to have to go to battle. While other Zionist camps often felt that military prowess and the use of force were somehow at odds with Zionism's fundamental ethos, neither Jabotinsky nor the revisionists who would follow him would apologize for being willing to fight when Jewish destiny demanded it. Jewish destiny, they believed, would periodically require the use of force. Sadly, history would prove Jabotinsky and the revisionists prescient. So let's go back. Thank you, Rhiannon. If we can go back to full screen. Here's the question I want to ask about Jabotinsky. It seems like he has a little bit of a bad rap. It seems like he's out of step with the prevailing ethos of the time. And it seems like he was 1,000% right. 1,000% right. So I'd love your thoughts on that. There's not a lot of, Jabotinsky schools. There's a Rashi and there's a Gad and there's a JCDS and there's Solomon Schechter. There's no Jabotinsky. My kid goes to Jabotinsky Day School and my kid goes to Jabotinsky High School. Jabotinsky doesn't have, Jabotinsky is not loved and lauded in, New England or other diaspora Jewish communities. Jabotinsky has a residue of, he's that fighter type. He's begging. He's the King David. He's too violent. He's too Meir Kahana, right? And yet, obviously, he was 1,000% right. So I'd love your thoughts about, exploring that creative tension. How a guy who's 1,000% right is also not exactly welcome to the party of officially appropriate Jewish thinking. Anyone? Debbie Ginsburg.
I just want to say my uncle in Jerusalem had a condo on Jabotinsky Street. And
Yeah.
it wasn't far from the hotels we stayed at for Hartman.
Absolutely, Debbie. I was on Jabotinsky Street every day last week, or 2 weeks ago when I was in Israel. There is a Jabotinsky Street. So in Israel, and Begin was, obviously became the prime minister, and Begin was a complete disciple of Jabotinsky, as I understand it. But am I off here? I've always understood that there was a reluctance or a reticence about Jabotinsky in polite Jewish circles in America. And I'm wondering why. Anyone else wanna, but you're absolutely right that there's a Jabotinsky Street in Jerusalem, and I think Israelis get his importance. John and then Paul. Oh, Paul.
I somewhat admire Jabotinsky because he was a fiber-like pagan, but he called for settlements throughout the biblical land of Israel. However, Arabs were living there. And we learned from that book that we read a couple of years ago, My Promised Land, that it was not an empty land. There were plenty of other people living there that the Israelis or the Jews displaced. So this creates a mixed feeling amongst many liberals that here we want to have some control, and we don't want the Palestinians to have control. And somewhere there has to be a compromise. And it's a very uncomfortable situation because we know, at least I think, that right now I don't see a good answer. It's just going on and on, unless someone comes up with, we just have to come to a compromise, and we have to give something up, but I can't suggest what it is.
Yeah. And to add to the complexity, Paul, Jabotinsky was very strong about protecting the civil rights, the political rights of Arabs who lived in Israel. He was very strong about protecting their civil rights and civil liberties. So you just have a lot of complexity. By the way, you see, if those of you who watched the film on Begin was, in so many ways ahead of his time in welcoming Jews of color and Sephardi Jews and Yemenite Jews. And he was beloved by parts of Israel, Jewish Israel, that had been previously marginalized. And he seems like he's way ahead of the time. And yet Begin was a very strong proponent of settlements, Jewish settlements throughout the land. So you have just a lot of complexity with Jabotinsky and with Begin. I want to just close by reading the last on page 65, Rhiannon. And I'm asking you to think about it. We're reading this on election day in America. And I want to just invite you to think about how you hear this on election day and how it compares to our own nation now. So, Rhiannon, if we could get more of the bottom of page 65. Perfect. Thank you so much. Zionism had become a series of unresolved debates. Some, Herzl, sought a state, while others, Ahad Ha'am, insisted that statehood would lead to spiritual bankruptcy. So the Jews should seek only a spiritual center. Some, Bialik, thought religion was the cancer that had destroyed the Jew, though Bialik retained a love for Jewish religious texts, while others, religious Zionists, saw in religion the only hope for sustaining the Jewish people. Some ignored the Arab issue so consistently that they seemed to imagine a Palestine in which there were simply no Arabs. Still others, Herzl, not that different, hoped that the progress Jews would bring to the region would earn them the respect and admiration of their Arab neighbors. Others, Jabotinsky, however, thought those views foolish and said that if Jews were not willing to fight, they had no future in Zion. Some, Nordau, imagined a Jew redeemed by a new physicality, while others, Aleph Dalet Gordon, insisted that physicality had to be rooted in working the land. Zionism was a movement, but it was also a collection of competing dreams. So thank you, Rhiannon. And you see those competing dreams still at play last Tuesday in Israel. And you see, disciples of Jabotinsky and disciples of Max Nordau, Otzma Yehudit, in dialogue with different views. I guess my prayer that I would offer us as we read this is that somehow in our own country, we could recover the art of principled difference and principled disagreement. Pirkei Avot says, "Machloket l'shem shamayim, sofo lehitkayim." That if there's a principled disagreement, it's not vitriol and it's not personal, it's not ad hominem. You just disagree on the merits. Sofo lehitkayim. A community that can do that can continue to exist and get stronger as a result of it. But then if there's a machloket l'shem shamayim, if there's a disagreement that's not principled, it's personal, it's ad hominem, it's January 6th, it's where's Nancy, ein safo lehitkayim, that cannot continue, that has no future. Or to channel Abraham Lincoln, a house divided against itself cannot stand. So my hope and prayer for our beloved country, however you vote, however we vote, however the nation votes, is that we recover the fine art of a machloket l'shem shamayim, principled disagreement, disagreeing on the merits of ideas and not hating the person that you disagree with. Thank you so much for class, guys, and I will see you next week. Please read chapter 4, the next chapter, which is From a Dream to Glimmers of Reality. And again, my apologies for our technical difficulties, and I'll have that fixed by next class. Thanks so much.